Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche for Thursday, March 2nd. Now, many of you are involved with us already in certain actions and activities that we've been carrying out, particularly since last Sunday's, 10 days ago, I should say, Washington, D.C. rally, which featured independent candidate Diane Sayre, also Jose Vega, as well as several other people that addressed that rally, including Dennis Kucinich, former congressman, and Tulsi Gabbard, former candidate for president, and Ron Paul, and others that were very prominent there, and it included even Chris Hedges. Other people came out. What's important about that gathering, or what's important about what has been happening in the United States since then, is that an important grouping of people previously associated with the American intelligence establishment as well as with the American military from the days of Vietnam have made it very, very clear what their view is of certain events going on in the United States. And importantly, in that regard, something was issued by Daniel Ellsberg, which I think some of you know who that is, the person that released the Pentagon Papers. And he released something that talked about his medical condition. He stated that, just reading it quickly, "Dear friends and supporters, I have difficult news to impart. On February 17th, without much warning, I was diagnosed with inoperable pancreatic cancer on the basis of a CAT scan and an MRI. As is usual with pancreatic cancer, which has no early symptoms, it was found while looking for something else relatively minor. I'm sorry to report to you that my doctors have given me 3 to 6 months to live." Of course, they emphasize everyone's else's case is individual. It might be more or less. "I've chosen not to do chemotherapy," so forth and so on. He says, "Please know that right now I am not in any physical pain. After my hip replacement surgery in late 2021, I feel better physically than I have in years." And it goes on like that, describe that. And talked about his work over the past 6 decades. And he said, well, actually, 60 years ago, about a little bit less than that, more like 54 years ago, for my release of the Pentagon Papers, 1969. But that didn't happen. He said it didn't really lessen the time of the war the way I thought it would. Negative reaction to that and other things that helped to do that. He said, "I wish I could report more progress to you all in terms of our drive to stop nuclear war. But I can't, though it's not too late for that progress." He sort of elaborated this. He made the point that he has gone way past the proverbial 70 years that are allotted a lifetime, according to the biblical reference of 70 years. He's 92 years old, and so he said he's had a very good life, and he doesn't want to leave now, but he also can say that it's not too late to do something about this circumstance. So the reason I think it's relevant to point that out is that he, of course, is very identified with Vietnam, as is Seymour Hersh. Seymour Hersh is 7 years younger, approximately, than and Colonel Richard Black, who you heard from many times, is a combat veteran of over 80 combat missions in Vietnam, and served proudly in that war, and so forth. Says that, but is very adamant about the inhuman approach of the United States military in Iraq, situation in Ukraine. And then you have Ray McGovern, who is 82 years old, I believe, and is 10 years younger than Daniel Ellsberg, and talks about how he entered into military service at the beginning of the Cuban Missile Crisis, or there approximately 62. And therefore, that again is 60 years ago. And his own, everybody knows about Ray's role, particularly since 2003, in trying to point out that the United States is taking the country to war under false pretenses and doing it over and over and over. This is not a small crime. This is a fundamental crime against the Constitution of the United States. And what has to now occur is that the people of the United States must prevent that violation. They have to stand up and do something about it. So to that end, many of us are involved right now in a certain kind of mobilization. I won't go through that. We'll talk about that somewhat in the questions and answers and discussion period. I do want to point out, however, that this is in a much broader international context. And something has just ended today, which is a meeting of the Group of 20 Nations. It was held in New Delhi. And there will not be a final communique that comes out of that meeting. The Group of 20, of course, has not got the same outlook as the so-called Group of 7, which is Europe and the United States, a grouping that used to dominate because they dominated the world economy, but they no longer do, largely because they're no longer productive. They're actually in a form of Malthusian free fall. They've all got negative population growth, and many of them have negative life expectancies like the United States. Now, what that means is that they are failed states. You are living in a failed state. There has never been a time before in American history where its life expectancy was dropping in the kind of dramatic way that is going on today. At no time in our history. Yes, during the period of the flu pandemic of 2018, it was a compromise, but there was a recovery from that. Did not go on. But what's happening in the present day United States identifies a form of economy which is the most negative and least successful, the greatest failure in the history of this country. So what happened at this meeting was there was no final communique, and India's newspapers, News 18, reported this, quote, foreign ministers of 27 countries have participated in the G20 foreign ministers meeting. So there were 27 nations, not just 20. The meeting was the biggest congregation of foreign ministers focused on what unites us, not divides. And what was reported is that multilateralism is in crisis. Now, Tony Blinken went into the meeting of the United States trying to get a statement attacking Russia. And this provoked tensions in the group. Joseph Borrell, who has said that every place outside of Europe is a jungle and that Europe is a garden of the European Union, Joseph Borrell, he went in saying the war has to be condemned. I hope and I am sure that India's diplomatic capacity will be used in order to make Russia understand that this war has to finish. But India's prime leader, Modi, said he wanted to focus on food, energy, fertilizer security, reality, in other words, the things that are actually on the mind of emerging nations and nations that are in charge of billion-person populations. And he wanted people to act on common ground. Now, what happened was people from the Netherlands we're talking about there's no alternative but for every nation that's there to support Ukraine. But Modi said, well, why don't you try thinking about the nations that are not in this room? Because, of course, there's over 200 nations on the planet. So how come that's not going to be the subject of anything? What's important here is that the idea that the world agrees with what's going on in Ukraine in terms of the war is not true. Further, it should be noted, as Douglas McGregor, Colonel McGregor, and Scott Ritter have been saying, is that Ukraine has been defeated on the battlefield, particularly with respect to what is now going on in the city of Bakhmut It is now being admitted that it is that, whereas before it was being said that it would be irrelevant if the Russians took it, it's now being admitted that this is a critical victory and could cause the disintegration of the Zelensky line, as it's called, which is the eastern line of defense, well, it's actually the eastern line of offense, because they were attacking Donbass. They were attacking the Lugansk and the other territories there, so Donetsk and Zaporozhye and so forth. So where we are is that as we go into tonight, our responsibility is not to talk about current events, but to talk about current history. And we've tried on these calls, and I think we've succeeded in providing for people the broader context, the broader envelope of context. As a way of abbreviating and therefore getting right to Gerry, let me just tell a little story. It's not important in its own right, but sometimes on the phone, those of you who know, you get these emails, and sometimes they have quizzes. And I got a quiz today. The first question was, what was the biggest empire in history? So they have the Ottoman Empire, they've got the Mongol Empire, they've got the Roman Empire, they've got the Byzantine Empire, and they have the British Empire. Now, since I know the answer, I put the answer in. And then they have a little write-up. They say, yes, the British Empire encompassed a quarter of the population of the world and a quarter of the landmass of the world. And, it recently went out of existence when it became largely what was called Commonwealth, etc. Yes, those of us in the LaRouche movement have known not only that fact, but that at the end of the war, after Roosevelt's death, Britain was the only superpower, not the United States. That term was used to identify the British Empire, not the United States. And what the British then did was to seek to assimilate or re-assimilate the United States after the Second World War. Even our entry into Vietnam has more to do with Malcolm MacDonald of Britain than it has to do with the French at Dien Bien Phu. What happened was that the United States broke free with the Suez Crisis. It was Eisenhower that broke the United States free of the grip of Great Britain, and it stayed free for approximately 6 years until the assassination of JFK. And since that time, what has happened is to increasingly incorporate the United States into that empire, and the major topic, or rather target, of the British Empire has been the United States. And that is the war that is being fought right now, the actual war, which is Britain against the United States. But there are too few people in the United States who have the ability, intellectually or otherwise, to face that. And therefore, they can't face the creators of 9/11. They can't face the people that are responsible for the Iraq war policy. They can't face what Henry Kissinger told them all in May 10th of 1982, when he said, I acted in my incarnation as Secretary of State. I was closer to the British office than I was often to my own State Department. He stated that. He just told the story. People can't face the implications of that. And so the LaRouche movement, which was fearsome in its way of attacking and going after this thing on the British ever since January of 1974, has to play a role which is different than other people. And we do that by trying to tell the story about current history, not current events. So even as you hear us denouncing, as we will, the criminal actions of the United States in these wars and so forth, we understand how these policies have been shaped ever since November 22nd, 1963. And it's our job to play a central role in mobilizing the American people, but you've got to go to the core. The core is that it was Lincoln's and Roosevelt's and also Kennedy's policies on physical economy expressed in Reconstruction and the Transcontinental Railroad in the case of Lincoln, a reconstruction he did not live to do, expressed in the four freedoms of Franklin Roosevelt and his mobilization of the United States out of the Great Depression, and for the successful prosecution of the Second World War, and Kennedy around his space program. This is the true United States, whose interests are in opposition to those of the greatest or the largest empire, the most nefarious empire that ever existed, the British Empire. And it is our job to make sure that people fight with the tools they need to realize and to understand how to win that battle. So in our discussions of history, in our discussion of corrections of history, the purpose of this is to fortify us to fight the battle the way we've got to fight it, recognizing the limitations of knowledge of the people that we are talking with, but also the necessity of victory over this policy establishment, of which the United States State Department is largely the primary proponent. It is not the proponent of American conceptions whatsoever. It is the proponent of imperial conceptions, which are opposite to the interests of the people of the United States. So everybody's got to stand up. We've got to stand up and take the United States back, and take back the institutions of power of the United States, starting with the presidency and the Congress. So in that context, let me now let Gerry go ahead and give what he has to say to you. And then as we get into some of the discussion, we'd like people to think about what he's going to say, and then place a bit of discussion, from that standpoint in terms of what we're going to be doing over the next days. So, Gerry?
Yeah. Can you hear me, Dennis? Am I hearable?
It's a little bit muffled or something.
I don't know. Well, when I get going, I get pretty loud. So, if it gets unhearable, please let me know. Okay.
It's not
okay.
Good now. Wait. It's really bad now.
Okay. Well, Charles, can you do anything?
I cannot do anything.
Okay. Okay.
Gerry, just try saying a couple things slowly. Let's see how it is.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tonight concentrate on the complexities of the actual strategic situation that we're facing. Can you hear that, Dennis?
Yeah, there's some distortion, but if you go about that pace, we'll be able to make it out, I believe.
Okay, I'll do the best I can unless you want me to call back in. If it really gets bad, please stop me, and I'll call back in. Maybe it's like rebooting it.
Very good.
Okay.
That's not bad.
All right.
Keep going.
Okay, fine. Okay, so look, we are in a moment of what is called epochal change. It's not just merely some reform or some different arrangements. The actual forecast that Lyndon LaRouche made in 1971 of the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system and the increasing violation of natural law by this really financial and monetary system, in violating the actual physical laws of production, has hit the boundary condition. LaRouche warned of this in 1971. And we are at that moment in history. Now, what makes it unique is a combination of developments, which Lyndon LaRouche, and after his passing, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and a number of others, have created something that had never existed before in history. And it does make sense given the fundamental scientific discoveries, both in physical economy, but also in the nature of man as a creative species, that a combination that was fought for over 40 years, now going on 50 years, from the earliest moments of the proposal for the International Development Bank and then later follow-on proposals, there is now a preponderance of governments in the world who adhere to some form of or some understanding of the fundamental laws that govern development and the fundamental laws that develop of what we're up against. This is clearer in some cases, less clear in other cases, but there has emerged now, and with increasing power and increasing capability, which I'll go through some tonight, of a strategic combination worldwide with different complexities in different areas, but a strategic combination worldwide that can actually and is in the process of overcoming the breakdown crisis of empire. This does not always happen, and I'll go through a case that it didn't happen in. But that now you have an extremely complex situation, and we'll get to what Dennis was getting at within the United States, but I want to get to that at the end. There's a very famous dictum, which is true if you think about it. You can repeat it, but you have to think about it. When Abraham Lincoln said, "You can lie to some of the people all of the time, you can lie to all of the people some of the time, but you cannot lie to all of the people all of the time." And I am talking about worldwide. That the narratives around Russia, around China, but particularly Russia and China, these narratives, which the British Empire believed if you can control the narrative, you can control the process of thought. And these narratives have come to the point where nothing in them is true, the exact opposite is true, and increasingly people worldwide recognize that. Now, how does that really impinge on the situation today? The question of Lyndon LaRouche had been the central question since 1971. The lies, the operations, the attempted assassinations against LaRouche, the enjailing of LaRouche, the almost uniform attacks across the world on LaRouche had created a situation where a very few courageous few who actually were capable of thinking outside the box, as they say, and seeing what had happened to their countries, particularly Glaziev in Russia, certain critical people inside China. LaRouche had gone around the world and met with critical people, important people. But the lies continued. And now, because of the breakdown crisis, the kind of extreme extremities with which the world has been put through, particularly on this Ukrainian war, people, very prominent media people who are not part of the legacy media, who thought LaRouche was X, Y, and Z, are beginning to come to the realization that they had been lied to about everything, and finally they've come to the realization that they were lied to fundamentally about LaRouche. Now, and I'll get back to that, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork for the discussion tonight. Because what you're seeing now, and this is something everybody on this call has to really think this through. We are not forming a Russia, China, India bloc against the British Empire. That is not what we're doing. What Helga in particular is doing is creating a deep comprehension of the nature of the crisis, and that a true estimation of what has to be done in order to solve this is increasingly, you see, there's a trap, and it's a very easy trap to fall into. We are speaking about the truth. We're not speaking in defense of China. We're not speaking in defense of Russia. We're not speaking in defense of India and the developing sector. That's not what we're doing. Yet all that is being done. What we're creating is a dialogue, a process of dialogue in which the nations of the world, the sovereign nations of the world as sovereigns, are coming together worldwide because of the efforts of, in particular now, Helga, Diane, Dennis is critical in this discussion, are coming together worldwide, increasingly so, using the Schiller Institute platform, using other platforms. Today, it was yesterday, Helga, in dialogue with the Chinese, with CGTN, was asked to host a joint Schiller Institute CGTN discussion of where Europe has to go at this point, and the extremely dangerous implication of the attempt to decouple Europe. As Helga said, what will happen is if Europe is decoupled from China, then Europe will be deindustrialized. And indeed, the British Empire, which now controls critical sections of the United States, would love for Germany to be destroyed, because they know that if Russia and Germany got together, as was being done until this nasty, disgusting operation in Ukraine was launched, then you would have, along with China, India, you would have an economic and scientific renaissance, the likes of which had never been seen before. And under those conditions, you could win the United States to that kind of perspective. So the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline was not an attack on Russia. It was an attack on Germany. And you see now resistance in Germany, 50,000 in Berlin, and maybe thousands more, and that's just the beginning. So that you look at what's going on with Putin's speech in Russia. This was an extremely clear, powerful speech, which is why you will not have access to it unless you go on the Rumble site. And I'm going to quote you some things just because you will see what is actually going on in Russia. Throw out any idea that they had any choice but to do what they did. And I will challenge anybody on that. The only reason we do not have World War III right now is because President Putin had the guts to say either you give us assurances that Ukraine will not be part of NATO. If you do not give us assurances that they will not kill the Russian population, which they did in Luhansk and Donetsk, if you do not give us that, then we will have to act. Because the danger of World War III would be unstoppable at that point. In a very clear, delineated way, this is not a war. Look at what we did to Iraq. We leveled Iraq in the first hours, Baghdad, the first hours. This is a military operation to secure the life and safety of the citizens who happen to speak Russian in Ukraine from a Nazi-like regime. And as Putin said, quote, 1 year ago, to protect the people in our historic lands, to ensure the security of our country, and to eliminate the threat coming from a neo-Nazi regime that had taken hold in Ukraine after the 2014 election, it was decided to begin the special military operation. Then we skip. The appalling method of deception by the West around the Minsk Accords has been tried and tested many times before. They behaved just as shamelessly and duplicitously when they destroyed Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, Syria. They will never be able to wash off this shame. The concepts of honor, trust, and decency are not for them. They got used to spitting on the whole world. It turned out that they treat their own people in the same way. Then he goes on, and I'm giving you a sense of this because it's extremely powerful. We are not at war with the people of Ukraine. I have made that clear many times. The people of Ukraine have become hostages of the Kiev regime and its Western handlers. The West is using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, as a testing range. The longer the range of the Western systems, the longer the range of the Western systems that will be supplied to Ukraine, the further we have to move the threat away from our borders. This is obvious. The Western elite make no secret of their goal, which is, I quote, Russian strategic defeat. But how does he proceed? He talks about developing the economy in depth. He talks about science in a very specific way. He talks about culture. It is not genres or trends that matter. Culture must serve the good, beauty, and harmony. Culture ponders some very complicated and contradictory issues in life, but its main mission is not to tear down society, but to nurture the best human qualities. And then on the discussion of technology, innovative technology invariably relies upon existing fundamental research. Here, just like in culture, and I want to emphasize this, we must give researchers greater freedom for creativity. We should not have everyone just focused on results that we need tomorrow. Fundamental science makes its own rules. The task is clear, and so on and so forth. Fundamental science makes its own rules. We have to do basic scientific research. So that you have in Russia, but it's extremely complex. The situation, particularly with respect to, they thought that the Russian economy would collapse through the sanctions. The Russian economy was supposed to collapse by 20%. It's only gone down by 2.1%. The agricultural output is the highest it has ever been. The people of Russia pulled together are creating the kinds of in-depth capabilities, logistical capabilities, housing capabilities. They had a breakthrough in housing, even under the conditions of the Ukrainian military operation. So you have an extremely complex situation in Russia. China, which has put forward a very significant peace initiative, which is those of you who have studied Helga Zepp-LaRouche will recognize very quickly. I'm just looking for the. Let me just add one other thing about Russia, which I think people really must begin to understand. Russia in 1991 had a new constitution. Some people, because they don't study it and they don't think about it, don't recognize that Russia. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm missing the preamble of the Russian Constitution. Well, we'll have to skip that. Anyway, China has put forward a very important proposal, peace proposal, for Ukraine, but for the world. And what people don't understand that Helga developed it today, and Jacques developed it in a different way, in which the question of Chinese intention, and Dennis did a very effective read a couple of days ago. People think of it as communist China. This is the kind of brainwashing that goes on. They use noise words, communism. Yes, it is a socialist system. a communist system in a certain, but with what they call Chinese characteristics. And their intention is that they brought 800 million people out of poverty. Now, I've studied this question, particularly with respect to the United States and the TVA. And China did something remarkable that no nation has ever done before in history on that scale. What did they do? See, when David Lilienthal, who was the founder of the TVA, who brought millions of people out of poverty in the what's called the Tennessee Valley Authority, went to Iran after he was thrown out of the Atomic Energy Commission and worked with the Shah of Iran to develop a TVA in a critical valley inside Iran. And at first, the World Bank, the IMF, the Shah put in some very effective people to work with David Lilienthal to develop that region. Well, what happened is that both the World Bank and the IMF, the kinds of credit that you need are long-term development credits, which means if they're not paid back in 10 years, you roll it over, you reorganize it, but that what you're trying to create is a generation of new productive labor. In other words, you're taking a country that was extremely backward, and you're developing the infrastructure and the necessary skills, as was done in the TVA. It took 10 years to develop that region. And it takes the kind of development credits that China is actually giving to other parts of the world. Well, because of the monetarist and British Empire takeover of the United States, the initial credits for Iran to develop these dams under Lilienthal's direction, particularly a particular dam, they said, well, that's not going to give us a payback that we want. And therefore, you're going to have to do much smaller projects, a much smaller level. And the Shah said no, and he took whatever development credits he could and actually built the thing. But then all the other projects for health, for education, for these kinds of things, he couldn't do. And then the imperial bureaucracy that had run Iran for hundreds of years came in, took out his people, and ultimately the project failed. What did China do to bring 800 million people out of poverty? Something no nation in history has ever come close to. A combination of an understanding of what the purpose of the credit and the money was for, i.e., to build the necessary infrastructure over a generation. It took China 2 generations to develop this capability. And it's a long story. But what Xi Jinping did is he did something that nobody had done, which is he cleaned out the party structure of the corrupt elements that had been impeding the progress. And the party went to the people, because that was the mission, and discussed through with them what, as in the March of Democracy in the TVA, discussed through with them, where are we going, what are the potentials, how do we get the roads, the rail, the other necessary connectivity, bring your products to market, to bring culture in, and therefore China is the intention of China, which is what I said last week or 2 weeks ago. The intention of China is the development of not only their people, but in the Belt and Road Initiative, these credits are development credits, not like the IMF and the World Bank, not like the British Empire, from the mine to the a rail from the mine to the port. That's it, right? And they think in terms of a generation, a new generation in Africa, a new generation in the different countries they're working with. And that creates the markets, that creates the scientific capabilities, that creates the ability to bring all of mankind forward. That's China. Is it perfect? No, but it's in the right direction. What is Putin doing with Russia? He brought it out of absolute destruction after the fall of the wall and the absolute looting of Russia, which Glaziev wrote a book about called Genocide. Putin consistently concentrated on the people. Yes, he had oligarchs. People who bought the means of production at money, no money whatsoever. They used it to buy yachts for other things. He said, okay, but now they're all losing that because for all sorts of reasons, they're all losing it. And he said, repatriate that money and help build Russia. This is in the midst of a war, or not a war, but a intense military confrontation. And he says, we're going to make it because we're going to stick together. And we're now part of a combination, as Lavrov said, with the BRICS, the SCO, and others are joining with a concentration on a new generation of a 20-year horizon of development, of progress, of science, breakthroughs that you could not even imagine. This fusion thing is critical. It will change everything. So that the British Empire, as Dennis had developed it, that this American really disgusting quality of venality. And Putin is a very moving speech, by the way, that he gave. But you have the 120 countries now thinking in that kind of direction, not with equal clarity, not with equal capability, but thinking in that direction and rejecting the so-called rules-based order, which is complete tyranny for every person on this planet, including and emphatically the United States. And what Dennis Speed has initiated, along with Diane and others, is that we're going to take back this country. We're going to hold up to shame, particularly on this Syria situation, hold up to shame and the disgusting shame of this military operation in Syria, the Caesar sanctions, the murder of a civilian population, and you have a number of people beginning to recognize and there are ways to do this, to take back the institution of the presidency. The hands they're in now, the kind of lies, the kind of risking nuclear war, we're beginning to get a sense, and it was described, the developments in Washington were described very effectively, the rally, as a new Gideon's army. And I think that's very apt, because these were not forces that people brought in. We were there in number. There was about 3,000 people, 3,000 to 5,000 people. But each of those people came on their own volition. It wasn't like a trade union bringing a couple of hundred or this or that. It wasn't like that. It was individuals of conscience who are now standing up to their congressmen and learning how to stand up to their congressmen. And I just want to end at least this phase of it so you understand what we're dealing with here. I'm going to read you a section of what's called the Melian Dialogue from the Thucydides Peloponnesian Wars. And this is the Athenians who had become the imperial power of Greece. And they come to the island of Melos with numbers, with military force, and they say to the Melians who came out to meet them, the Athenians say, for ourselves, the Athenians, we shall not trouble you with specious pretenses, either of how we have a right to our empire because we overthrew the Persians, or are now attacking you because of wrong you have done us. And make a long speech which would not be believed, and in return we hope that you, instead of thinking to influence us by saying that you did not join the Spartans, although they're colonists, or that you have not done us no wrong, will aim at what is feasible, holding in view the real sentiments of us both, since you know as well as we do that right, as the world goes, is only in question when equal in power, while the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. So that was the mindset of the Athenians in the Peloponnesian Wars. Might makes right. And please don't make any arguments because we have the power to do what we're doing. Well, in one sense, we should thank Russia for what they have done. To say, no, you don't have that kind of power. But more importantly, what happened to the Athenians in the Peloponnesian Wars is that they went too far in the invasion of Sicily. One could call it imperial overreach, or hubris, or thinking they were invincible. And they were destroyed and taken over. But they were destroyed long before they invaded Sicily. They were destroyed by their own inhumanity. They could not rally any forces to their side. And they had internal dissension. And in the famous Alcibiades dialogue that Plato wrote was about Alcibiades, who argued and created the Peloponnesian Wars. This was 100 years, or well, maybe 50, 70 years after the Peloponnesian Wars. Plato wrote this dialogue called the Alcibiades, and every Athenian would know. And the argument of the Alcibiades is, as a young man, Alcibiades trained under Socrates, but Socrates knew this kid had no morality. He was very talented, but he had no morality. And he said, unless you do the good, then you cannot know the consequences of your action. And if you do not know the consequences of your action, then you become a danger to yourself and others. And it's only when you comprehend the good and what is noble and good should you even attempt to get into politics. And that what has the question of the good has developed in the most profound and deep sense. Now, others had it, but the most profound and deep sense in the history of mankind of what the good was is LaRouche's fundamental breakthroughs on what's called physical economy and the implications of the creative capacities of man to invent new technologies, to discover new ways of organization of those technologies, to discover the types of societies that have that intention for the future of mankind to accomplish the good. That is not a particular type or logic. It's an intention. It's a mission. And that what Helga and Lynn and others have unleashed on this planet in a majority of nations of the world with a very intense fight that we have begun in the United States is to win the United States, take it away from these oligarchical fools, and restore the intention of the Constitution for the general welfare and the general good, and be part of this dialogue to actually accomplish the good for all mankind. That's our mission. We can do it because our enemies are collapsing at this point. So that's what I wanted to put on the table.